people analytics and the implementation and rolling things out, it's definitely not a sprint because it's not that you move fast and then boom, you're there. But it's also, I think it's not a marathon either, because with a marathon, it's maybe a more paced, it's longer, but there is a defined ending point. Like after 26.2 miles, you're done. It's long, but you're done at some point. And I was like, so rolling out data insights, people analytics, it's not like a sprint. It's not fully like a marathon. To me, it's more like running from the zombie horde. So
another wave comes, you mean?
Right? Like it's never ending, right? Sometimes you got to sprint. Sometimes you can slow down, you can pace yourself, but you can never stop. When you stop, that's when you die.
Matthew, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, good morning. How are you doing?
Nice to see you. It's been a while. When did we last talk, actually?
Well, it was a few months ago, yeah. It was a busy summer.
Yeah, how was the summer?
It was good. It went by fast, which is, I actually won't complain. Having the kids back in school helps with daily structure,
Everyone knows. My daughter went back to school yesterday, and my wife and I yesterday, therefore, we're like, this is good. It's a lot, right? It's a lot. It's amazing.
Routine works. Yeah, routine works well for them. So
100%, exactly. And us parents are trying to keep them entertained all day. Yeah. It's like, I'm run out of ideas.
I reflected at some point. I'm like, when I was working from home one day with them at home, and I was like, how did we do this during the pandemic? Because it was
3 years, straight. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh man, I think we've all got PTSD and we just blocked it out. like it never happened. I'm surprised you haven't built an algorithm yet to predict how to keep them organized.
I don't know if you could keep up.
Some analytics of that. But before we jump in, tell everyone a little bit more about yourself personally and sort of the journey to where we are now in this current role.
Yeah, so leading people analytics and HRIS here at Protective Life. The company, we're life insurance and retirement products, so financial services based in the U.S. So our CEO likes to say that we punch above our weight. So we're a small company that maybe not a lot of people know about, but we really do have a big impact in the market. Mm-hmm. And we're the U.S. arm, we're the U.S. owned subsidiary of a Japanese life insurer. So we got sister companies all across mainly Asia Pacific, but we are the North American branch of the Dai-ichi Life Insurance Group. So
that's quite an interesting story though, because if I remember correctly, the founders. Could you share that story? Because obviously of how the Japanese side of the business.
So I say we've been the U.S. subsidiary here since 2015. Mm-hmm. We were acquired. But Protective Life ourselves as a company, we've been around for 100, if I can do the math right, 117 years now, I think. Wow. Founded and based here in Birmingham, Alabama. So, we kind of fly under the radar in some ways, but yeah.
Wow. And there's me thinking 7 years in business was long.
Yeah. So I've been here for 5 years now, leading people analytics and HRIS. I've been in the people analytics space now for probably 8 going on 9 years. Had worked at a commercial and consumer Fortune 500 bank before that, building out the people analytics function, then got recruited away to come here. So I've been kind of in this journey for, like I say, going on 9 years now, which is sort of a career pivot for me, which I think is not abnormal for a lot of folks in people analytics now, or at least it's for a while there. You didn't tend to start a career in people analytics. You would find your way into it from somewhere else.
Or another function. Right?
Yeah, a lot of folks from finance or risk or IT in some cases. For me, it was really weird. I actually started my career in the military. I flew helicopters in the Army.
Oh, really?
So the very career pivot, if you will.
That's a new one, and I've done 1,000 episodes. That's a new one.
I say I'll never have I love my job, but I'll never have a job as fun as flying helicopters ever.
I think that's probably you peaked too early.
And I had the vision of a full 30-year military career and retired. Things, family reasons, things kind of changed and ended up getting out and kind of searched around for a while, worked in commercial aerospace for a little bit, and then found my way. I wanted to get here to Birmingham, where we're headquartered for family reasons. So I kind of pivoted into the HR space based upon the military background, leadership development, leadership experience.
Ah,
That's
nice.
what got me into HR in the leadership development function. And then a couple years out into that, I got tapped to build out the people analytics capability at the bank. Um, and I joke, although it's not too far from the truth, that the executive of operations, his eyes landed on me and said, "Well, you have an engineering degree, you understand math. A lot of HR
I
folks
was
don't
about to
understand
say that.
math."
Is that like,
So,
what is your background outside of the helicopter, like in terms of the analytical nature of the role? Like, so you studied
yeah,
engineering beforehand.
yeah,
Okay, cool.
yeah,
That's a great combination. So you are quite a rare. You have the analytical side combined with your experience with leadership, and bringing that together, and the commercial, obviously, understanding of organizations. That is quite unique.
yeah, yeah. So,
To bring together. So I know
yeah,
for some,
nobody's going to have that exact path, I think, again.
but that's the whole point. Sometimes in life, right, you taste different things and have those different experiences and jobs, and you never really know how that's setting you up for success in the future. I never thought
Yeah,
I'd be doing this job. Like if you ask
yeah,
anyone that knows me, they're like, and we kind of explain what we do. I'm like, but it's the combination of all of those lived experiences that gave me the right skills to be able to do this.
yeah,
And I never knew that at the time, to be able to do that. I know.
yeah.
So let's jump in. I know when we last spoke, one of the things that came up, which you're really passionate about, is what we're calling sort of the last mile problem, delivering insights to leaders. Before we jump into that, it'd be great if you can give everyone some context of what you mean by that, and sort of break that down, and then we can kind of jump into the meat of it.
Yeah, so the last mile problem, kind of terminology comes out of logistics, supply chain realms, and so you think of what it takes to get a product from a manufacturer into a customer's hands, and so I'll use to kind of paint the picture. I'll use Amazon as sort of an analogy for this, and to be clear, I have never worked at Amazon, so I may say, I'm going off of things I've read or
Yeah, sure.
assumed. So I may get something totally wrong in how they actually do things. So if there's any audience members who actually work or worked at Amazon and I get this wrong, forgive me. But think back to the early days of Amazon in the aughts, for example. They didn't have they didn't have close to the number of fulfillment centers, warehouses that they do now. Like if you actually had the other day was curious, so Googled to see like a time trend of the number of warehouse facilities that they have, and it grew for a while, and then in like the mid 2010s, 2015ish, it just sort of like exponentially skyrocketed the amount that they're building or have. So if you think of the last mile, right? It's getting the product to the customer, and so you saw over time Amazon would had expanded their footprint, and gotten more fulfillment centers out into more states closer to customers. That helps cut down on the distance, if you will, to get a product to a customer. But the challenge is the last mile is literally like once you've got the product into the town of the person, getting it to their front door or to their mailbox, to their front door. And that tends to be the most challenging and difficult and expensive aspect of the supply chain, right? So like flying a product on a cargo plane costs money, but you fit a lot of product in there, it's efficient. But once you get it into the town, getting it out to all these different locations, specific customer locations, gets really expensive and challenging. And so that's the hard part to really, for a supply chain, to slim down costs, get more efficient. And so you see Amazon has over the years experimented with all different kinds of approaches, right? So they used to be, I think they were exclusively UPS was their deliverer for a while. And then I'll totally mess up the order and the timing, right? But over time, they expanded from having UPS doing the deliveries to using the postal services also, to having their own delivery fleet of vehicles, to building out Amazon lockers where customers
Yep.
can go pick something up from a location in a town themselves. They experimented with, I don't know how far they ever got with the drone
The
delivery,
drones, I remember
you
playing
know?
around with that. Yeah, I think
And
they were the first to get licensed to do some
yeah, yeah.
tests.
And
Yeah.
so they experiment with all kinds of things, and what did they land on is they use a lot of those. They use a lot of different ways in different contexts for different reasons, for different urgency of product to deliver for different locations, right? So it's a mix because no one size fits all for closing that last mile. So pivot this into the space of people analytics and getting insights into the hands of leaders, right? So the companies that have been going down this journey, a lot of the early phase of that supply chain or that delivery chain of getting insights to leaders is the things like building out an infrastructure. So you have some kind of, you've presumably built some kind of people analytics platform, either a home built or a vendor delivered. Could be a purpose-built thing like Visier One Model or embedded analytics, like if you're a Workday customer. But whatever it is, you've built something out. If you haven't done that, right? If you're still doing people analytics in Excel, right? The last mile is not the problem.
Yeah, it's not your problem. Yeah.
Right. Like you have other things to do first. But once you've built that out and then you have this infrastructure where you can develop and deliver insights efficiently and hopefully you've gotten or are getting to the point where you have direct user access for your leaders, right? So that you're cutting HR or the people analytics team out, largely cutting them out as the middleman for generating a deck or printing something to a piece of paper or something where people have actually secure access themselves to get to those insights. That's where the last mile then really starts to become a challenge of, well, I've got all this stuff available. I've got all this insights available, but how do I efficiently at scale deliver it to, dozens or hundreds of leaders? How do I get them to consume the right thing at the right time, in the right way that they're going to understand? How do I make sure that they're looking at it when they need to, but they're not wasting brain power or time or energy when it's not useful? So those are all the kinds of problems related to that last mile of getting the data insights into the hands of leaders. And so it's a challenge that I face in figuring out what works, because different, like going back to no one size fits all. Different things work for different people. So it's an interesting challenge to kind of figure out, well, let's try these things, and it's going to work for some people and it's not going to work for others.
Let's start then more with what hasn't worked, because I feel like sometimes hopefully we can help our listeners avoid some of the pitfalls and mistakes that you've seen, that you've personally maybe have made, or that you've seen other organizations make. So what are the things that you're seeing that are not working?
So it's hard. I don't think there's anything proactive that you're doing. I don't think that anything doesn't work at all. What it really comes down to is for each company kind of figuring out what works for more people, right? Because there may be something that works really well, but only 5 people engage with it. Well, then it's not efficient for me to spend the time on it for 5 people, unless that happens to be like the CEO, the CFO. Okay, maybe then I'm gonna still, right? So what I would say is what doesn't work is if you have that whole infrastructure and you have the ability to put insights into leaders' hands, well, I'll say the one thing that doesn't work is just putting it out there. So if you just put it out there and assume that people are going to consume it, right? So it's like, what is it? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, right? Mm-hmm. So if you just put it out there, and actually I've used that metaphor to say it more like, in some cases, it's not that we've led the horse to the water and they're not drinking. It's that we've pointed them. We've said, hey, water's over there and you need to go over there, right? So that is one thing that definitely doesn't work, where you throw it out there and you're just relying upon people to go access it, consume it.
Why is that? Why doesn't it work?
Yeah, and again, it does work with some people, but in general, that's a much harder path to get to where you want to be, of people leveraging and using those insights. And I think part of why it doesn't work is leaders are just busy, right? There's a lot going on that they're having to deal with. It varies for different leaders based upon what their job, their function is, but leaders are just busy overall. And in a lot of cases, people data and people insights is a newer thing. And so they may not be used to using and consuming and considering some of that. So it's different than the norm for them, and they're just busy overall. So they're not going to take the time. They don't have the time to engage and do what I, in a perfect world, would want them to do. So I think that's part of it. And then related to this, I think it's also that we, people can, assume that people need to be motivated and that they need to want to do something. And so I actually think in a lot of ways, leaders often have more intrinsic motivation than we give them credit for. So like a lot of leaders would want to leverage the data insights we have about people. Um, but it's not as easy as we people in my role tend to think it is for them to do so. And so the kind of one of the things that kind of guides my thinking on that, there's a researcher, a professor at Stanford, a guy named BJ Fogg, who has this his model of behavior change. And I won't try and describe it as perfectly as he does, but essentially he's talking about the behavior change. To get somebody to do something, it's a function of their motivation, their ability, and a trigger, like or a prompt. Something has to prompt or initiate them to do something. And so then it exists on this kind of two-dimensional axis of the motivation and the ability. And the problem in business is too often we spend our energy trying to motivate people to do something, to inspire them, to get them to want to do something. But that goes back to what I said. I think they actually, not always, but often have better intrinsic motivation than we give them credit for. The challenge though is the ability, right? So if somebody has high motivation to do something, but they have low ability or it's hard to do, then the likelihood that they're going to do what we need or want them to do to access the insight, to leverage it, to apply it is harder just because it's hard, right? So I've actually pivoted over the last few years, and it's not that I never spend any time trying to motivate or inspire people, because sometimes that is useful, right? To give people ideas or get them to think about things that they hadn't thought about. But I probably spend more energy focused on the ability. So lowering the barriers for users to use data.
What does that look like from a practical point of view?
Yeah. So maybe one of the first things, and this I guess this would probably apply in lots of cases, but is the upskilling the data literacy of your team. So that could be the HR team, could be your leaders, right? So one, there's generally some effort needed to help upskill the data literacy of people to understand and know how to use data. We could probably do multiple podcasts on the data literacy side of
Yeah.
things.
Could you just give us an overview of some of the ways you've done that, like briefly, like whether it's like courses, whether it's like different platforms, like what's some of the things that you used that found has worked in terms of upskilling your
Yeah.
people?
Yeah, you've used different things at both of the companies, but with the HR team, do a lot of virtual learning. So live instructor-led virtual learning where we work it into things.
Do you build that
On
or use external company for that? It'd be great if you could have any that you could
we
prefer.
we have in the past a little bit, but we're small enough that it tends to be more maybe not more efficient for us to do it, but we get that more granular control and get
Okay,
concepts focused on what's relevant to us.
cool.
But there are some good ones out there in the market that that especially when you get bigger and need to get more efficient that that could be leveraged.
Okay.
Um, so upskilling data literacy that's like think of the fertile ground for somebody to be able to cognitively be able to use what we put in front of them and interpret it the way that we need them to. So that's one way. The Getting things out and making things easier. So I think about putting the right insights into the right leader's hands at the right time, right? So if you're distributing something to everybody on a periodic basis, maybe that's overkill, right? Like maybe I don't need to be looking at the analysis on this thing every month if it's not relevant to me at a certain time. So we've played around in our platform with ways of delivering using criteria or triggers to deliver something to a leader.
I was about
Only
to
if
say
they
you mentioned trigger in the method earlier, right?
Mhm.
So you want to link that each of these things to the trigger. Oh,
Yeah.
I know we're using it in a different context now, but you mentioned earlier, like, because if it's not linked to their challenges or a business objective, I'm assuming that makes it, they're not going to be as engaged in the
Yeah.
process.
So a trigger could be that they've come to you and said, "Hey,
Yes. Yeah.
I got a problem with this," right? Like
Yes.
they could actually be the trigger themselves. The trigger could be that we know. I'm just coming up with a hypothetical here. Like we know when certain conditions are met, say in employee listening through engagement surveys. Like we know from prior experience when teams tend to have certain indicators show up in their employee listening data, that tends to be precedes something with retention problems, for example. So that could be the trigger of, well, if we start to see data coming up in the engagement data and the employee listening, that we anticipate that you may need to be preemptively starting to deal with some retention issues, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be a lot of different things, but that idea of the trigger of being something when it meets a criteria that we've set to then share an analysis or an insight with a leader, but only if it's relevant to them, right? So
Otherwise,
that they're not.
it's such a pain, right, in companies now where they just send you everything and then you open nothing because
Yeah.
nothing's
I
relevant.
will give. I will do give sort of the counterpoint to that. Sometimes there are things where I have said it is useful to look at things. So like we have an executive dashboard that all our senior executives get. Technically, they have access to it on demand at any point, but we push it out every month as a reminder, like, hey, go check it out. And a lot of the metrics on there don't change on a super frequent basis, right? But that's one where maybe the counter is I say it is useful to get into that and just look at it, even though it may not be changing frequently, because you need to develop a sense of what's normal or like what's right
That makes
for
sense.
my, so that when something is different,
Context.
you're able to recognize that, hey, something's deviating from the norm here. So
So you mentioned before one of the main mistakes is just putting it out there and hoping that everyone's going to gravitate. Any other kind of common mistakes that you see people make or that you've made in the past that people should avoid?
Yeah. So you had used the word before a couple times, context. So that's another one I think is when you get something out into leaders' hands, some analysis, some insights, not providing the right amount of context. And so that, I think if I'm putting an analysis in front of somebody that's a data and visual heavy thing without a lot of context explaining that, sets the background for why this was done, how I should be interpreting the results that I'm seeing, that could create a lot of problems because you can't know that every data consumer is consuming and interpreting and applying what you've given them in the way that you think. And I, not to give a specific example, but there have been times where I've been on a call and somebody has looked at a chart, for example, and they verbally talk through it. And I'm like, in my brain, I'm like, wow, you totally misunderstood and don't even understand what that's telling you. And so that partially does link back to the data upskilling, the data literacy. But so putting it out there, one problem, putting it out there and just assuming people are going to consume it. Two, putting it out there, knowing or making sure that they do consume it, but not giving the context necessary and kind of holding their hand and making sure that they're interpreting and understanding it the way, the right way or the way that you intend. That could lead to problems if people are and then they're doing something and, I may be sitting here in my office not knowing what they're doing with it. So, imagine the problems that might create.
No, miscommunication. It's interesting because I've probably had 200 plus people analytics leaders on the show, and one of the things that kept coming up over and over again is, and it surprised me if I'm being honest, when I asked them about key, and this goes with the point you just mentioned, skills of a people analytics leader, and it was storytelling. And it kind of threw me off. So I was like, what do you mean storytelling? And to your point, is providing, here's the data, but also telling the story so you have that context so people understand. Because if you just throw too much data at people, then it's just overwhelming. But if you don't, so there needs to be this balance of context, storytelling with the data. Is that something you've evolved how you present that over the years to ensure that you? Yeah,
completely. I was at a conference. Let's see, this is several years ago, 2018-ish, 19-ish, somewhere in there. Colin Nussbaumer Knaflic, she was the keynote speaker at one, and so if you're familiar with her name or people who Google her if you can figure out how to spell it, but
I was about to say,
yeah. But she wrote Storytelling with Data, and now
amazing.
it does data storytelling consulting and training and all that. And so she was a keynote speaker at a conference I was at, and she was just like, wow, like she kind of walked through a mock board presentation in a bad way, right? And then stopped and then went back and did it again in the using a lot of the right things of data storytelling, and it was just like night and day different. And so that was, maybe that wasn't my first thing, exposure to that concept of storytelling, but that really opened up my mind of effective ways to get around, or to get at doing that. And it's interesting. So actually, completely unrelated to my role here, just sort of a personal passion thing that I do at the company. Also, when we have our intern class come through every summer, I'll do the training session for them on, we call it the informed intern. So I'll do a training session on presentation skills for them.
Nice.
And that just relates to some other things that I have been involved in. But I think presentation skills are an important thing, right? Because if I've got a great idea, and again, this is completely separate from people analytics, but if I've got a great idea that I want to share with somebody and get them to embrace it themselves, or to do something, to take some action, if I can't effectively communicate that to them, well, it kind of does no, there's no good done that I've had a great idea if I can't get that across to others.
Yeah.
And when I'm, one of the things I do when we're doing this presentation skills training is I talk about the three I'm totally gonna mess up the three methods of argument, logos, pathos, and ethos. And so talking through the ethos, the ethical appeal, and the logos, the logical appeal. The tendency in business, I think, right, is to go to the logos, to making a logical appeal, right? So we present things using facts and data and charts and figures and all this, and it's very, very rigid like that. And we fail to make the emotional appeal too often.
It really sticks. Yeah.
Yeah. Where you're tugging at heartstrings, you get at things people care about, right? So think visual imagery, stories, things like that, examples, analogies, quotes. And that's what, no presentation of data should involve only the data, right? You have to weave together the data, the logic, the insight with the thing that's going to make it resonate and get people to care about it and connect it with themselves or their job or their team or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So yeah,
and that's how
big.
Yeah, and that's how we've been built to do so for thousands of years as human beings, to tell stories, and they live on now as legends and myths and fables. Well, right?
Stories were passed down before writing.
Yeah.
Existed in modern form. So
exactly.
Yeah.
So I whenever I look back at memories from business or even parts of my life, I don't remember the data. I remember the feeling and the way I felt, and the visualizing the location where I was when I felt it, if that makes sense. Those are the things that really stick with people. So to your point, if you can connect those two things together, very powerful. Very powerful.
The feeling. So I've explained that to people. Like if you're going in and doing a big presentation, and so people could apply this in the analytics space or other other professional realms. You're doing a presentation on something. The audience is not going to remember everything that you said. There's no way. Their capacity is. So if you're going in and you're presenting on, here's the 10 things of blah blah blah. Well, they're not going to remember 10 things. They're going to remember the key takeaway. So like, what's your main message? They need to be able to take that away. And so you got to have a very crisp, clear key takeaway, right? Because if your key takeaway, if it's something that you can't get across in the space of 2 or 3 sentences, it's too complex. That key takeaway, and then the emotion, how they felt when they heard it. If you nail both of those, having a clear and concise main message and positive emotion, they'll come back to what you said, right? So they'll have the deck or their notes or executive summary or whatever, right? They'll come back to get the details later. But if they walk out not caring or not being clear on what the message is because they're confused because you weren't crisp enough on it, they're not going to come back to the rest of your data.
Yeah.
So
I think that's why TED Talks work so well. Because if you see any great TED Talk, it's exactly what you just described.
Yeah, well, so I should mention the reason I do our presentation skills training for several years before the pandemic. Actually, my outside of work activity actually organized our local TEDx event here in
No
Birmingham.
way, dude. That's
Yeah,
such a
yeah.
That's
So
crazy.
I've coached dozens of speakers for that exact
Yeah, because
reason.
they
And I
have a
actually
model,
found,
right? They have a specific
yeah,
model of it. That's so funny that
yeah,
you said that.
and I've actually found be it a TED talk or just other presentation, shorter tends to be better. Like people think, oh, I need to
Yeah,
no, like shorter is harder. It's much harder to get across an idea in
100%.
4 minutes,
Yeah,
but tends to be better also because it forces you to get really focused and crisp.
yeah.
We've like totally diverged off the data here.
I was about to say on that point, we've covered quite a lot, and so let's go back to we started with the last mile problem. What would be your key takeaway and key point that you do want people listening to remember then when they think about this last mile problem?
Yeah. So what I think the key takeaway is you got to experiment and try different things. You'll probably have to do multiple things over time. Like you're not going to find one thing that closes the gap, closes that last mile for everyone. So you're going to have to experiment with different things. Some of them may work better than others. Keep the ones that work better. Scrap things that are less efficient and take more work and aren't touching as many people. But you'll probably have to keep doing multiple things, and you'll probably have to continue to evolve it over time. There's, some, especially because people settle into complacency. So you'll probably need to continue to reevaluate over time what's working, what's not, continue to evolve and change. Something we haven't gotten into yet, but I see it in the near future. And I see more possibilities is using generative AI to help deliver some of that.
Sure.
To get it out into people's hands in a more efficient but still very effective way. So yeah, so that's I would say it's a living, breathing problem that you'll never fully solve. So you got to keep working to solve it again and again and
Yeah.
again.
I absolutely love that perspective, and you have to have that mentality because a lot of people have that. We have to get it right, and this is how it should look. No, it's not there's no end.
Yeah.
There's no finish line for that project. It's an ongoing living and breathing, as you said, as new technology like generative AI come through, as new, business challenges arrive, whatever it may be, as well. It's a living and breathing. So don't get too caught up in perfection, or worrying about getting things wrong. It's through that failing forward and that constant pursuit of disrupting yourself. That's going to be part and parcel and very normal.
Yeah. One of my go-to examples or analogies I've used. I'd spoken at a conference years ago before the pandemic and was talking about people analytics and some people say, you've heard people say, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? And so I was like, well, okay, people analytics and the implementation and rolling things out, it's definitely not a sprint because it's not that you move fast and then boom, you're there. But it's also, I think it's not a marathon either because with a marathon, it's maybe a more paced, it's longer, but there is a defined ending point. Like after 26.2 miles, you're done. Your European audience, I can't convert that to kilometers. They'll have to do that themselves. But it's long, but you're done at some point. And I was like, so rolling out data insights, people analytics, it's not like a sprint. It's not fully like a marathon. To me, it's more like running from the zombie horde. So
another wave comes, you mean?
right? Like it's never ending, right? Sometimes you got to sprint.
Yeah.
So you don't always have to. Sometimes you can slow down, you can pace yourself, but you can never stop. When you stop, that's when you die.
Yeah, I love that analogy. That is very much a misconception. What would you say is one of the other big misconceptions that you hear and see around people analytics?
I don't know. I don't know if there's one big misconception. There's probably lots of little ones that happen. Maybe if I can generalize it out to a big misconception is that people sometimes think that the data is going to give them the answer. And so that's one thing that I've definitely seen is in most cases, not in all cases, but in most cases, people analytics actually never gives you an answer. Maybe there are certain things where it's if you were our CEO and said, "What's our head count?" Okay, I can give you an answer, right? Like, so there's some straightforward things where is an answer,
Well,
but
some companies can't even give them that. So,
yeah,
so yeah, I was trying to find that one out. That yeah, not as easy as it sounds, everyone. Yeah,
especially when you get the HR and finance arguing over what's the head count.
yeah.
So
Go on, carry on. Sorry.
but yeah. So, but more, it's this misconception that people analytics can give you answers to questions like, are we hiring the right people?
Mm.
The right people. What's the right person? Do we have a metric or an attribute, or do I have a badge in my profile
Yeah,
at work?
I saw one recently similar to that. It was an article, and it said, "Can people analytics really tell why people are leaving your company?"
Yeah, no. Like,
Yeah.
I can tell you, I can give you the reason that was coded in the HCM of why somebody left. That's not wrong, right? But it may help narrow the focus.
Yeah.
But there's definitely more so to really take that in. So there's a lot of cases where people analytics can deliver insights, but there's a lot of assumptions that are going on. So an important thing, and this actually goes back to the data literacy before, the fourth pillar of the model or the framework that we use for data literacy is data skepticism and curiosity. And so I talk about having a healthy data skepticism, understanding what something's telling you, but more importantly, understanding what it's not telling you. What assumptions are you having to make to interpret an analysis? And if those assumptions don't hold true, then your interpretation of it may not be true either. But yeah, so the common problem, I think, or a common problem can be that people are over their expectation of what you can get out of people analytics, maybe not in line with reality, because they think it can give you answers. It can, I'm sitting here saying things where I like maybe sounding like I'm underselling the capability that I work in.
No, you're not. You're giving. No, this is really important what you're saying. Yeah.
You got to understand, like, what are the limitations, right? And so I think I've said before that people analytics doesn't give you the answers. What it helps you do is ask better questions. So like if a question's asked and I can narrow in and I can weed out what's clearly not relevant or not important, I get more focused. Then I ask another question and I then weed more out. So it's sort of this iterative process. People will say, peeling back the layers of the onion, of getting more and more to knowledge, to insight. But at some point, yeah, there's assumptions that are being made that you have to realize, nothing can fully tell it. I can't go into our analytics platform and say, what was the turnover rate of the right people, but we can put some assumptions around, well, what do we define as the right person? Or, in any of these kinds of things, talking about, do we have the right people on board? What's our quality of hire? Like, we can put some constraints and assumptions saying, well, this is how we're defining who's the right type of employee, or, the reasons why people are leaving. There's all kinds of things, but you narrow in, but then at some point there is a little bit of a faith of, well, we've looked at all of this and we've weeded out the things that clearly aren't relevant, and we're focused on things, and this, all indications are this is what's going on.
Love it.
The analogy, I use a lot of analogies.
I noticed you're Mr. Analogy. I'm gonna have to throw in your last analogy before, and then we'll say goodbye. Go for it.
Yeah. Well, and the reason is I found that simple concepts or analogies or things that I can link back to, that I can take a maybe more complex people analytics concept and link it back to something that you just understand as a human being or as a business person, tends to help bridge that divide of like, oh, I don't get that, to, oh, okay, yeah, this makes sense. So the idea of weeding out the stuff that doesn't matter, focusing on what does, but that there's still some assumptions going on. The analogy I use to talk about that is how astronomers, when they're going out, they cannot observe black holes, right? Like, you can't, like, by definition, you can't look through a telescope and see a black hole, because its gravity is light can't escape, right? Because of of the gravity of a black hole. So you can't actually see it. Yet astronomers know where black holes are, and how do they do it is they see all the markers around it, so they can look at other stars and other solar systems and see how their gravity is being affected by the black hole. So they can kind of look around it, and can see, okay, based upon all what we are observing here, we are pretty confident that there is a black hole here, right? And so it's similar in the people analytics space. We can't actually look at some things because they're not measurable, they're not actually observable, but we can start to look at all the markers around something. So going back to the are we hiring the right people? So we could put some markers around, understanding our involuntary turnover in the first, couple months of hire, the performance in the first year, all kinds of things like that. We could put markers around it and go, well, if we are seeing all these things, that's giving us a pretty good confidence that we hopefully are, or aren't hiring the right type of people. So.
It's so interesting because all of this comes full circle to what we just spoke about earlier, which is also the storytelling. Whenever all of your analogies is what I'm referring to are stories, right? Because sometimes we can turn complex into, very easy to understand by telling it in the context of a story as well. But listen, I could talk to you forever, but I have to let you go at some point because you've got a job to do as well. And I've got a daughter I've got to pick up from nursery. But before I let you go, where can people reach you? Where can they follow you if they want to reach out and say hi? LinkedIn?
Yeah,
best?
Yeah, LinkedIn is the best. I'm not really much of a social media maven except for LinkedIn.
So it's a link. Yeah. No worries. Well, for everyone listening, as always, the link will be in the description. So going to connect with Matthew. Matthew, I appreciate you coming on, sharing your journey and experience, and I wish you all the best until next week. I appreciate you.